What is a fallacy? Can you tell me what a fallacy is? All right, so let's listen to Danny here, and you're going to see the high level of argumentation you get from this guy, and just see if you think that he's arguing honestly, right? And it starts out okay because it seems like he's asking good questions, but it only takes a few minutes before you see it's total sophistry. The form itself is invalid, or do you think that the way it's presented is invalid?
Oh, no, it's not invalid in virtue of its form. I mean, like, you can have question-begging arguments can be valid.
Okay, but I'm saying, do you think that the way that tag is presented when you stick God in, or is it the form of the argument itself that's no good, in your view?
Again, the form, it's a kind of informal fallacy, begging the question. Technically, question-begging arguments are formally valid.
Not begging the question, though. So he thinks that tag is begging the question, which is a very, very low-tier critique of tag from, your standard atheist. And so he's like, well, I don't really have a problem with, X is a necessary condition of Y therefore X. That's not a problem. I have a problem with the begging of the question and formal fallacy aspect of tag. So let's see if that holds up.
Okay, well, that's what remains to be seen. Every time it's been presented, it tends to beg the question.
So that's why I'm asking you. Do you think that if I say X is a necessary condition of Y therefore X, do you think that's okay or not?
The form is fine, but you understand, informal fallacies are... Go ahead.
No, you go.
Informal fallacies, that's a problem with content, not with the form of the argument.
Formal fallacy is. So I'm trying to get you to tell me specifically where it's begging the question.
Well, I mean, you do the impossibility of the contrary thing, right? You try to support the first premise. So something like there's intelligibility or insert whatever transcendental, and there, God is a precondition for that transcendental or that intelligibility. And then when I ask to support that premise, it's then the move is to say that the contrary is impossible. But that's precisely what needs to be shown.
Now, if the argument was only an impossibility of the contrary, he would be correct that that's not enough. And that's why we always present tag not just with a negative critique, but also with the positive position of Christian metaphysics and the Christian worldview. So it's only half of the argument to say, well, you're doing a negative critique, an internal critique of my position, and you're trying to argue that my position is, incoherent, it has no justification, but that doesn't mean that your position is correct, right, just because mine has no coherence, right? And if that was all we did, he might have a point. But we also say, well, there's also a positive metaphysic and worldview and paradigm that Christianity does have that also just happens to give grounding for transcendental categories, ethics, universals, etc. So there's more to the argument than just the negative critique. I don't think at this time, this was a couple of years ago, he actually was aware of that. So maybe he had only heard the internal, negative critique type of position. And then you're going to notice that when I ask for the actual justification for any kind of claim, he has no idea what's going on. If it destroys the possibility of knowledge, then it's impossible.
Okay, but I don't see how it would do that, right? That's just a claim.
So he thinks that by asking the question of an atheist to give an account for epistemology, and if their position destroys the possibility of knowledge, then the atheist position is false, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that my position is automatically true. I mean, maybe it will be, maybe it won't be. But at least at this point in the debate, we've established that atheism isn't true and doesn't have a grounding for knowledge. But here's where he's going to totally mess up. Listen to this.
And by the way, before you click on that, that means the atheist can't have a critique of orthodoxy. Like you said, at this point hasn't proven orthodoxy true, but they'll just hand wave as if they weren't just refuted, that you're not going to be able to have a critique of anything, let alone orthodoxy. And they'll go immediately to start making a bunch of epistemic claims. The one thing they're showing that they can't do. So the debate's over at that point. We don't even, in most of these cases, you don't even have to prove orthodoxy. You just
which is actually why Danny, I think Danny and a lot of atheists don't want to actually say what their position is. because they want to have no non-committal positions at all, but they think that's actually it's actually a debate tactic, but it's not actually true. It's not actually arguing in good faith, because every position necessarily entails some kind of epistemology. Even if you're an agnostic, you still have some kind of framework of how you know that, or how you have the ability to say that your position is agnostic. That's a knowledge claim. So to have any knowledge claim still requires some epistemology. But watch where he goes right here. Not a claim. If you posit something that doesn't ground or give an account for a precondition of knowledge, then knowledge is not possible.
If you posit something, well, I don't take atheism to be some view of like an epistemological view. It's not supposed.
It's not an epistemological view. It's a claim that there is no God, or we have no knowledge of a God. It's a knowledge claim. Knowledge claims rest on some account of knowledge, and that's what he doesn't understand.
To account for anything, just like I don't believe in unicorns.
Say that again, Father Deacon.
Remember, Gordon Stein tried this, and then all the pop online atheists tried this too. That we don't have a position.
Yeah,
atheist is not a position.
Yeah.
And, well, yeah, there is no positionless person. And so you do have a position on these things. So notice he's actually trying to do the same thing here, this tactic. Like, well, I don't actually have, it's like you don't have a position, then you just forfeited the debate.
Yeah, if you don't have any way to ground knowledge, then you can't make anti-Christian arguments. That's the point. So this person would actually benefit from a epistemology class, as we often say, and none of the atheists, like 99.999% of atheists never know a single thing about epistemology. By the way, to the guy in the chat, Cartesian, you're welcome to call in. He says that we will just kick him out. So you have a professor on here with you. You can ask the professor, Father Deacon Dr. Ananias, and you only get kicked out if you are obtuse or dishonest. G-Up says for $5, Danny the atheist confuses tag argument 1 if-then statements with tag argument 2 either-or dichotomy statements that show the impossibility of the contrary and a reductio. Tiffany Angel became a member. What's up? So here's the rest of where I press him on this point.
That's not supposed to account for transcendentals.
That's the problem. So now you're trying to have knowledge claims and skirt the giving an account for how knowledge is possible. So you have to give an account for epistemology.
I mean, sure. I mean, I could see why you would say that, but atheism, again, is not a position that asserts like anything about it.
It is. So atheism has no epistemology, doesn't assert anything about epistemology, even though he just made knowledge claims. Atheism, there is no God, or I have no knowledge of God, or there is not sufficient evidence for God. That's a knowledge claim. So you're dealing with people who don't even realize what a knowledge claim is, and then think that I don't have to give a justification for my knowledge claims.
Epistemological.
That's not true. You do.
Well, why? What about atheism implies a particular?
Because any knowledge claim requires justification for that knowledge claim. So even for you to say that atheism doesn't posit knowledge claims is a knowledge claim.
No, well, first of all, they're atheists that say they believe, and they don't even claim to know. They just believe.
I don't care what the other atheists say. That's irrelevant to what I'm asking him. He just talks about what some other atheists say, like not relevant to what we're talking about.
I'm saying atheism is not defined in terms of knowing that God doesn't exist.
I'm not talking about specific knowledge about theism. I'm talking about any knowledge claim. Everybody has. So he doesn't understand that any knowledge claim requires some system of knowledge, some theory of knowledge. Epistemology.
Let's reset, right? Do you take atheism to be a view in epistemology?
Atheism requires some epistemic content to have any claims at all.
Maybe you're going to have to break that down for me because I don't know.
It doesn't go anywhere from here, so you can see what we're dealing with here. So the reason I bring him up is not just because of the Jordan Peterson exchange, but we will be having a Piers Morgan debate next week, with Danny. So I'm going to be on Piers Morgan debating Danny next Wednesday. And I can imagine that it's not going to be any different than what you just heard.